Hello everybody, welcome to the first live stream of 2025. I hope everybody had a good break, at least over the last couple of weeks or so. If you haven't attended these before, I do them every Friday usually at 2:30 UK time, just as the US market is opening. Yeah, that's it. Over the weekend, I'm going to do a look ahead for major markets. I'll upload that to the channel over the weekend. So if you haven't subscribed, if you subscribe, you get notified when that goes live. But Happy New Year. Once more, we'll do it all again and see what happens this year. It could be an interesting year. It was a bit of, for US stock markets at least, it's a bit of a damp squib finish, I thought, to the year. This is the S&P. We had that big sell-off 18th of December, and then it really went nowhere. So US markets trading pretty much where they were just after the US election or middle of October. So a bit sideways there, although we did have an all-time high in December for these markets. Anyway, so what I'll do on this session, as usual, we'll take a look at some of the major announcements for next week. Big week next week. It's been a bit of a sluggish start to the trading year, not surprising. I came back into it yesterday, and it's been a bit sluggish, but I think things will get back to normal next week. And there's some big announcements next week as well. So blah, blah. Let's see what happens. So we'll have a look at the announcements for next week. Then we'll have a look at the major markets. And if there's anything else you want looking at, put it in the chat. Put it in the chat on YouTube, and we'll take a look at it. Right, let's get into it. Let's do a risk warning for the sake of good order. This presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones accepts no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets, CFDs, futures, foreign exchange work, and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Trading is risky. Okay, so next week, it is a big week next week, I think. But on Tuesday, we've got EU inflation. So the CPI, consumer price inflation for the Eurozone. That'd be interesting. We've got US services PMI, Purchasing Managers Index. So the state of the service industry in the US. So that's like a little barometer for the state of industry. And then on Wednesday, the Fed minutes, so the minutes from the last meeting, which I think if you remember, that's when it was deduced that there was only going to be 2 rate cuts this year in the US compared to the 3 that I think markets were expecting. So that'd be interesting, those minutes next Wednesday. And then this time next week, the non-farm payrolls. So the US employment numbers. So they could be interesting as well. And then, of course, we have later this month, Mr. Trump takes his seat, regains his seat back in the White House. So it's going to be an interesting year, isn't it? Interesting few years with old Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk up there. Let's see what happens, see what it all looks like. So it could be an interesting year for the US dollar. Obviously, we'll take a look at that in a minute because the US dollar is at a 2-year high at the moment, the dollar index. So we'll take a look at all of that. We'll look at some of this other stuff in a second. But for now, let's get into it. So US stock markets, it's the same old for me. If we start things off with the S&P, we're in this trend. You know, we've been in the latest leg of this trend since October 22, I would say. You know, so we're 2 years into that. What was the level back then? Where was the S&P then? 3.6. And it's currently about 5,900. So it's up 60-70% since October 22 lows. The latest run looks like that, pow, since the October 2023 lows. So for me, you know, it's the same old. I'd be a buyer of the dip. That's it. You know, if the market starts to lose 5,600, I might be a bit concerned about the state of the trend. It has been a bit of a... We've had some volatility the last couple of months. Not much progression. You know, but overall, I'd be a buyer of the dip, and that's it, really, you know, for me on the S&P. So perhaps next week is a bit more interesting. It's been a bit scrappy this week. So maybe it gets a bit more interesting next week. Let's see what happens. Same for the Nasdaq. Nasdaq was up. The Nasdaq 100 was up, I think about 30% last year. Sorry, in 2024. So again, I'd be a buyer of the dip. We had all-time highs for the Nasdaq in December. So I'd be a buyer of the dip there. There's an argument to be a buyer of the dip today. I was looking at this morning. It's all been a bit chop since before Christmas, but these lows on the Nasdaq around about 20,740. They held yesterday late on. Let's see what happens today. Maybe we just get a bit of a scrappy day today. But on the S&P, similar sort of levels from just before Christmas at 57.90. So yeah, all positive for me anyway, but a bit uneventful recently. There's the Dow. I think the Dow was up about 12% last year. So 41.6 on the Dow is a level to watch. And again, you can see, looking at the daily charts now, fairly boring. A couple of weeks. Let's see what happens. So that's that for the indices. Still in their big trends overall. Perhaps that changes in 2025. Let me show you something. Let me see. I think I did save it. I was going to put it in something over the weekend, but I'll give you a snapshot now. And I was thinking, it's been a bit boring. The S&P. Perhaps in recent weeks, but I had a look at this. I don't think, is it going to work? What I did was, I don't know how clear this is going to be. I looked at, can I make that much bigger? I asked ChatGPT to show me the annual performances of the S&P going back over the last 20 years. And again, like I said, I'm not quite sure how clear this is going to be, but to read it off, 2024, 23%, 2023, 24%, 2022, down in nearly 20%, 2021, 26%, 2020, 16%, 2019, 28%, 2018, minus 6%. So we have had, 6 years of big swings in US indices. Perhaps this year ends up being a boring year in the end. 2015, the S&P was minus 0.7% for the year. So I think definitely for me, I'm sort of used to, 15% plus moves in the S&P one way or the other over the year. And of course, there's no law that says that has to happen. So let's see. Let's see what happens this year. But anyway, ended the year strong. Trend still up. All the usual, blah, blah, blah. FTSE, boring. FTSE was up 6% last year, I think, was the number. Yeah, I mean, it's just all a bit sideways, isn't it? I never have anything that interesting to say about the FTSE. I did trade it back here in November and did all right out of that move. But look at it, since May of last year, so what's that now? 7 months, all a bit sideways, so nothing too exciting there. DAX, the German market, was up about 11% last year, I think. The trend is still up. It did hit a fresh all-time high in mid-December. So, that's still positive. I think an aggressive trade on the DAX would be to be a buyer and put a stop the other side of 19.6 somewhere. We had the breakout to all-time highs. Market sold off, blah, blah, blah. Maybe. But again, this can all wait till next week, I think. And the Nikkei was up just under 20% last year with that crazy move in the summer. Bounced back, and again, all a little bit sideways for the last few months of the year. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But stock markets, overall positive. Let's see. Dollar index, let's take a look at that. I'm long the dollar index from before Christmas, just in this trend. It did hit yesterday its best levels since here. 2022, November 2022. So 2 year plus highs on the dollar index. I think it'd be an interesting year for the US dollar, given the changes in US politics and how the markets react to that. But overall, it's pretty sideways, pretty sideways year overall. I think it did gain about 7%, the dollar index, in 2024. The trend is still up. I'd be a buyer of the dip. I'd rather buy a deeper dip. I'm in it already, like I say. But let's see what happens with that one. Interesting one next week, of course, with the Fed minutes due out. Let's see where we are with that one next week. What else is there? Gold. Gold's outperformed the S&P last year. It was a really good performance last year for gold. I think 27% up for gold last year. The big trend is still up. Again, a little bit sideways over the last, what would you say that was? The last couple of months or so. But, from a big picture point of view, I'd be a buyer of gold. But again, there's nothing really compelling to do at the moment. Silver, I'm guessing, is pretty much the same. I mean, silver might be an interesting one. Silver's always a bit of an odd market, but we did have had this uptrend since Feb last year. So we're 11 months into that. It's drifted back. If I wanted to be a buyer of silver, I'd be tempted to have a stop the other side of maybe $26. That you could have a more aggressive stop. That's what I would do on silver. Let's see. It did push out to that multi-decade high in October. Best levels since sort of 2012 on silver. So maybe that's going to be an interesting one this year. Let's see what happens with that. And that's that, really. Bitcoin. Where is the crazy world of crypto? Oh, where is it? Where's it gone from my lists? Oh, there it is, Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin, of course, had that massive run after the US election. A bit sideways over the last month or so. There is support down at 92 or ahead of 90, at least on Bitcoin. That sort of area. So, yeah, let's see. It's all gone a bit sideways recently. I'd still be a buyer because the trend is up and blah, blah, blah. I'd rather buy a deeper sell-off, though, than buying it here. But let's see what happens. But lots of support for Bitcoin. A trade I did do today. I bought oil today, actually. I did buy oil about lunchtime today, I think it was. It's pretty boring from a daily point of view on the daily charts. That's the last 2 years now for oil, and particularly the last 3 months of 2024. It was just really sideways over this old support. So it is a bit boring overall. Let's see what happens. I bought in today because the trend has been up since before Christmas. So I bought the dip today above 73 somewhere. Can't remember where. So interesting to see if that trend for oil continues on the hourlies. It is at a 2-month high, 2.5-month high oil, but it is really boring from this sort of point of view. And if you look at the last few months, it is really dull, the last few months. So let's see what happens with that. Other markets, natural gas still crazy. Gapped up at the end of last year to hit its best levels in nearly 2 years. Natural gas. I mean, again, massive volatility in this market. It doesn't look like it if we take the chart out like that, because of course we've had such heightened volatility over recent years for natural gas. But just this week, it's been as high as 447, and now it's at 370. So it's moved. What's that? 70, about not quite 20%, but about 17% just this week. Pretty volatile market. You very rarely see oil move 17% in a week. Anyway, natural gas, but it's breaking out. If I look at that now, that is a breakout, isn't it? We've broken out through what used to be an old level, an old resistance. Let's see what happens. Let's see how far this dip goes on natural gas. But for now, I'd have to be a buyer of the dip. It is with the usual disclaimer that it is a crazy market, natural gas. Interesting to see what happens if it pulls back to the old sort of breakout area down around 350. It's 372 at the moment. So let's see what happens there. But that's never a dull moment in natural gas. If we have a look at some other markets, what else can we look at? We've done stock indices, we've done the dollar index. I saw somebody asked about pound against the dollar. Let's have a quick look at that. I mean, clearly, so much of what happens here depends on what happens with the US dollar, obviously. But it's starting the year, or it did yesterday, it slipped to its worst levels since April 2024. So it got very close to the lows of last year. It's still weak, pound against the dollar, because, of course, the US dollar is still strong. If it's going to turn around anywhere, then this is the place, is one place at least, 123, ahead of 123. But I wouldn't be a buyer yet. You know, if we see the US dollar really strengthen in 2025, this year, then obviously, you know, the likes of the pound and the euro are going to slide against the dollar. So let's see. Let's see what happens. For now, you know, the trend for pound against the dollar has been down since September last year, still pretty weak. So I think it's interesting to see if we do get something of a turn down in this sort of area. But it'd be too early for me to be a buyer just yet. So that's that. What else? What else is interesting? Something we talked about in the WhatsApp group, live cattle. Now, cattle, some of these markets, you know, clearly, you know, a market is a market. It goes up and down. And live cattle, I've traded it in the past because there's been great trends in the past in cattle, but not for the last sort of 10 months or so. It's been really stuck and it couldn't get through these highs. But it recently has. You know, we were, I think it's all-time highs for live cattle at the moment. Interesting market, breaking out. So that for me, you know, I watch a mix of different markets. I think that's been a notable market over the last week because we have seen some strength in that. And also orange juice. Great trend in orange juice last year. I think it was up 180%, or is I getting it confused with cocoa? Hang on, let's have a look. Where did it come into the year? Ended last year at 316, ended this year at 504. So 200, oh, it's not 180%, is it? But it's still a good performance on the year from the price of orange juice, and that trend continues. So there are trends out there. Just some of the financials at the moment are a little bit dumb, I think. So markets to watch next week. Stock market indices, when hopefully we all get back a bit more to normal and see a bit more life in stock markets. Oil, I'm long oil because why? Because the trend is up on the hourly chart, so I think that's an interesting one. And the dollar index, you know, because it's that US Fed minutes on Wednesday next week. So I think they're interesting markets to watch. But some markets have got off to a bit of a sluggish start. Right, well, jump to the questions in a second. Before that, a bit of a commercial break. I run a WhatsApp group. I do a daily update. I do 2 updates normally. Markets I'm watching, trades I'm running, Q&A. I do an update in the morning on all the different markets, a bit like the stuff we do today. And then in the afternoon, I do an update on US markets and US indices, levels I'm looking at, and stocks I'm looking to trade. If you use the code YouTube, you can sign up and try that for a month and you get 20% off the first month. The link is in the description. There's a snapshot of what it looks like. And the broker I trade with is, if you go to bit.ly David Trade, actually I'll put the link in the chat. I've traded with these for a couple of years. They're great because they've got tight spreads. You can trade really small. I'm trying a slightly different approach with some markets this year. I don't want to risk loads of money, so I can trade small. And you can tie it all in to TradingView. So I think you've seen this before. This is the account that we use for the YouTube. There's a trade from the last live stream, I think, on JD. So that's the broker. And you can just link the trade into there so you can see all the stuff on the chart. So I'm a big fan of it. So if you go to the link is in the description, bit.ly/David Trade. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email. My email address is dj@davidjonestrading.co.uk. I don't have all the answers, but I do have a lot of experience. So any questions, feel free to send them through. All right, let's take a look at whatever it is you'd like to look at. So what have we got? S&P to buy today. Oh, I'm not doing that long list, WK. Come on, you're just taking a mickey of it there. I'll have a look at a couple of them. So, are you saying what's the S&P to buy? I mean, if I was buying it today, it's all been a bit choppy and scrappy, hasn't it? But, I'd still be looking at the lows from the 20th of December. This thing is where my lows go. Let's pick out some of these stocks. AVGO, Broadcom. That went nuts, didn't it? That's not... Oh, hang on. They've done the split, I think, haven't they? Hang on a second. Hang on. There we go. So Broadcom, the trend had been up and still is up on Broadcom over the last 12, 15 months or so. They had this big jump on earnings after December, and since then they've stalled. The problem I always have, so if you want to be a buyer, where's your stop going to go? So for me, I'd rather buy a pullback. The risk is the thing never pulls back, and I miss out. But if I was buying Broadcom today, then the absolute closest I would want my stop is the other side of 210. The low after the gap is what I would pick for the stop. Netflix, let's have a look at that. That was one I was in last year, Netflix, and I would still be a buyer. Trend was up. I think I came out of it probably in the summer. It's about there. But a great trend. All-time highs in Netflix in December. So again, it's moved a long way away from the trend line, that longer term trend line. But what would you do? I would buy the dip. And if I had to buy it up here, I'd want a stop below $800, the other side of there. I'd rather wait and see if there's a sell-off and buy the dip, because it has accelerated so much. So I'd rather buy that. But and Euro Polish Zloty. Let's have a look at that one. Euro Polish. I'd be a seller, I think. It's a bit of a funny one, isn't it? And again, there are arguments to be a buyer or a seller here. You could make the argument the trend is down on the Euro Polish Zloty. Yeah, and it's been down for 2 years. So you can make an argument to be a seller because you're going with the trends. You could also make the argument to be a buyer because we're bumping around the lows. Yeah, I think it's only the naive people who think there's only ever one obvious trade in a market, and of course there isn't. Markets move. Markets are driven by buying and selling. There's nearly always an argument to be a buyer or a seller. So there's an argument to be a buyer with a stop the other side of 420, or there's an argument to be a seller because the trend has been down. It's one of those ones I would look at it and think, well, that's just a coin flip as to whether it's up or down. So I'd go and trade something else. But I don't know. I don't know what I would do there. So I'd rather sit on my hands. I suppose if I had to do anything, the risk reward would favour being a buyer. So I'd be a buyer with the stop the other side of 420 and see what happens. Can we have a look at Coin and Meta? So Coinbase, which I'm guessing will have done well with all the crypto craziness end of last year. Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. It didn't get really anywhere near those initial IPO highs, did it? But I mean, it's absolutely had a good run, Coinbase, isn't it? What did it do last year, Coinbase? So it ended 2023 around about 150. So it did double last year, Coinbase. It's another one, isn't it? It's all a bit... It's not a smooth trend, isn't it? I was looking at some markets yesterday. So something I bought earlier this week was Visa. So for me, Visa makes sense to buy because the trend is clearly up. So I'm going with the trend. Coinbase, it's all been a bit sideways. Then it has a bit of an explosive move. Then it sells off again, doesn't it? So I don't know. What would you do? Don't know. I mean, you could say, again, there are going to be two sides to this. You could take the view, well, since all the crypto excitement has died down a little bit, the trend in Coinbase for the last month has been down. So if I'm going to trade it on that time frame over the last month, I want to be a seller. But I've looked on the dailies, that is positive overall. It has hit multi-year highs, but it's another one for me where I look at it and think, nah, it's not for me. Because who knows, if I was a buyer, I would want my stop the other side of 220, I think, at the moment. But it's all been a bit scrappy. You know, for me, the sort of stuff I look for, which of course doesn't work all the time. It's another one we were talking about in the WhatsApp group. You know, something like Costco that has a clear trend. I know where my stops are going to go and all of that. Coinbase, you know, because it's been quite event driven because of what's happened in crypto. We've seen these really sharp moves, and I think it's difficult for me anyway, to come up with sensible stops. So I would struggle with that one, to be honest, to know what to do. So yeah, don't know. Let's have a look at it in maybe a few weeks and see if it's a bit calmer. Meta, so the old Facebook. I'd be a buyer. So we had all-time highs in Meta in December. I mean, it was a really interesting couple of years, isn't it, for Meta? They absolutely fell off a cliff. That was the old all-time high back in September 21 at 380. Trades back to about $90 only 2 years ago. And here we are at 600. And the trend is up. So for me, I would be a buyer. I'd probably have my stop the other side of $500. I think a more aggressive stop is the other side of 550. So about 8% away from where the market is trading now. So I'd be a buyer. The only question is, do you wait to see is there more of a sell-off, or do you just jump in, buy it, and put a stop loss somewhere sensible? So for me, I'd be a buyer. But yeah, that's had a strong start so far. We're only 2 days in, of course, but a strong start to 2025. So let's see what happens. DDOG, Datadog. That looks like the Coinbase chart, doesn't it? Is it? Is it a hang on, let's see what do they actually do? Datadog, the software company. Okay. Cloud monitoring as a service. Well, there you go. So again, I'd be a buyer. The only question is, do you just jump in now and buy, or are we going to wait to see how far it pulls back? So if I was a buyer, it could be quite. It's a bit higher risk than perhaps some of the other stuff I normally do. If I was a buyer now, where's my stop going to go? I would say conservative stop for me, the other side of 121. The lows before this breakout, or more aggressively, the other side of 138, the breakout point. So I'd like to be a buyer. I'd probably rather have a deeper sell-off. I mean, the thing was trending before it went a bit nuts. You know, we definitely had an uptrend chugging away, didn't we? Before it all went a bit crazy. So yeah, I'd be a buyer. It's just whether I sit on my hands to see what happens over the next couple of weeks or so. And what was the other one? Shopify. I think this was in an uptrend, and it's still an uptrend. That had a good finish to the year, didn't it? I think you traded this last year in the YouTube account thing. So again, I would be a buyer, but we just need to think, well, okay, in November, it was $80. We had the earnings, and it's jumped up to $108. So it's had a 25% move. Are we going to see some of that retraced? So if I had to buy it now, I'd put a stop the other side of $100. I'd rather buy a deeper dip with the risk that the deeper dip doesn't happen. So it's always tricky, and I never like chasing markets, so I don't do it. So I don't chase the price, but it's tricky to know what to do. And Robinhood markets. God, that's another crazy one, isn't it? Again, it's a pretty volatile stock, isn't it? It's gone from $15 in August to $42.50 in December. That is a volatile stock. It's probably too volatile for me from a more medium-term trade point of view. If I was a buyer, I'd put a stop the other side of 31. So, yeah. NatWest Group, NWG, NatWest Group. So look at the UK listing. We've looked at these before, haven't we? That's a really good trend, isn't it? We've looked at these before because I plonked that trend line on at some point. So I would be a buyer. as usual, the only question is, do you want to buy now or do you want to try and buy the dip? If I was a buyer today, the closest I would have my stop would probably have to be, and this is in pence because this is a UK listed NatWest, the other side of 380, 375, and perhaps even deeper. But that really has been, it's been a great trend, hasn't it? What did it do last year? So it came into 2024 around 220. So not quite doubled in last year, but not far off it. You know, one of the bailed out banks, of course, from the old days. But yeah, I'd be a buyer. The only question is, do you wait for a deeper dip to buy? If I was buying today, I'd put a stop the other side of 375. Some traders say the end of January and the beginning of February is a seasonal time of money flows. Do you think the US stock market is going to pick again? There is something called the January effect, right? Let me be all down with modern technology and ask Microsoft Copilot. But there is I think there is something that shows what happens. January effect in stock markets. What happens in January can dictate the rest of the year. Here we go. Blah 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 blah. It has been, but yeah. So what happens in January dictates the rest of the year for markets. So if the markets are up, it'd be a positive year. If the markets are down, it'd be a negative year. But as the AI is correctly saying here, it's important to note that the January effect has become less pronounced in recent years, and some studies suggest it may no longer be a reliable market anomaly. So, to be honest, I take all of that stuff with a pinch of salt. You know, I think it's far more important the new government coming in than any January effect stuff. So I think that's much more important. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Brazil 60 back at June 24 levels. Okay, Kev. Brazil stocks beautiful and bountiful. Okay. Brazil 60 or Brazil 50? Did we have this last time round? I can't remember. But there's a Brazil. I can do you a Brazil 50. Oof. Yeah, we've definitely looked at this before, haven't we? Back at June 24 levels, long or short. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Well, I would be a buyer, but not yet. I mean, because it broke out, and look at that. I mean, that really has just gone back in a virtually not far off a straight line since August, isn't it? I mean, so you could say, well, it is looking a bit like a false breakout. Interesting one, though, isn't it? We've got these old levels, like you say, from June, down at 19.9. I mean, I'd be waiting for the bounce. But it is quite interesting if we do get the bounce here. But maybe this all ends up being a failed breakout. But yeah, if I was going to do anything, I'd be waiting to be a buyer and see if the 19.9 lows from June, as you say, if they hold on the old Brazilian 50. So let's see. That does tie up with a stock in my pension that I keep wanting to get rid of, and I should get rid of it. I keep forgetting to get rid of it. No excuse. But BRLA, which is Latin American Investment Trust. Look at a trend on that. Absolutely horrible. So that's an ETF that tracks Latin America. And clearly, looking at that Brazil 50, things are not having a good time at the moment, are they? Yeah, but interesting. Let's come back to it in a couple of weeks' time and see where it is. When you invest in stocks, do you invest in pounds or dollars? I do a thing, because I'm in the UK. Mark, I don't know where you are. I do a thing in the UK we can do called spread betting, which is tax-free in the UK, and I do it in pounds, but you can trade all these different markets around the world, but have it all done in pounds. So that's what I do. So it's all in pounds. But I do have a stock trading account that I don't use very often, but that's in dollars. So, you can have, as I'm sure it's the same anyway, accounts in all sort of currencies. But because I trade spread betting, I can trade in pounds in the UK on any market in the world. That's it. We looked at gold, US dollar. We had a look at those a bit earlier on, and the big trend is up. It's just been a bit boring the last couple of months or so. So I'd be a buyer. I'd be a buyer of the dip. So I do invest and that's a mix of pounds and dollars. So I buy exchange traded funds like, hang on a second. So for example, so I'm a big fan of ETFs. So I've got that ETF, EQGB, okay, which is a London listed ETF. So it trades in pounds, as far as I know, but it tracks the NASDAQ 100. Yeah, so it's a UK listed product that trades in the UK currency, but tracks a market overseas. Yeah, so just because you trade overseas markets doesn't mean you have to do it in that currency, but of course you can if you want to. What was I talking about before I jumped on that? Gold against the US dollar. So gold, I'd be a buyer of gold, but it's just been a bit sideways over the last 2 or 3 months. We did have a fresh all-time high in late October, so I'd be a buyer of the dip. If I had to buy gold today, the closest I'd want my stop is the other side of 2,530. But again, it's been a bit boring, and that has been a theme for a few weeks. I have found a lot of markets a little bit boring over the last few weeks. Stock markets weren't doing much. Things like the dollar were, so they've been interesting. But some of these others, that had good moves throughout the year, did go a bit dull in December. But we can't have it all exciting all the time, can we? So we'll see. So like I say, next week, what's to watch next week? S&P. Do we see these US markets get a bit of life one way or the other? The US dollar, because Wednesday we've got the Fed, the minutes from the Fed. Some of these commodity markets are interesting, like the old cattle and orange juice, and there's a few other bits and pieces as well. They're quite interesting markets. So let's see. So it's a bit of a sluggish start to the year, but let's not get too negative. We're only 2 days into the new 2 trading days into the year, so we'll see what next week brings. I'll come back next Friday and we'll have a look at all the stuff. In the meantime, if you want to check out the stuff I do, go to the website davidjonestrading.co.uk. If you want to see the broker I trade with, go to bit.ly/davidtrade. The link to the WhatsApp group stuff is in the description. Any questions, send me an email, dj@davidjonestrading.co.uk. Otherwise, we're done for today. Quiet week. Next week will be busier. I'll be back on Friday. So in the meantime, good luck with your trading. Have a good weekend and hopefully see you next Friday. And don't forget, if you're not subscribed, to subscribe, because I'm putting this video out over the weekend with a perhaps more detailed look at some markets to watch this year. Okay, thanks a lot and see you next time.